Welcome back, everybody. Today we are talking about Outriders Worldslayer. So up until this point, Outriders has had a couple free updates, things like the New Horizon update that goes through and kind of overhauled the end-game gameplay loop for Outriders. But Worldslayer is the actual first DLC for the game that adds new story, adds a brand new end game to conquer called Tarja Gratar, and it has new loot to farm. But it also comes with a $40 price tag. So the big question here is it worth it, right? Outriders, when it first launched, a lot of people had issues with it. Matchmaking didn't work so well, there was bugs, things weren't dropping right, people were getting stuck, people were falling through the map. It just didn't seem to justify a fully priced AAA game, so a lot of people refunded it and there was a lot of issues. So there's a lot of skepticism around the first DLC here, right, of Worldslayer. So Outriders had reached out and provided me with an early access key, a press key basically, and said, hey, play through the game and let us know your thoughts. So that's what I'm doing here. The big thing I want to start off with first is story, because this is sort of the biggest thing that was pushed first, right? When we first got our teaser that Worldslayer was coming, they introduced a new villain, Commander Arishrakal. And I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. There's a lot of letters in there. Arishrakal, I think. So anyway, Commander Arishrakal is this kind of red-haired altered that obviously establishes herself as the main villain. But we're going to get to that in a moment. So the actual story itself, as a returning player, felt very disjointed at first. It felt like things were just sort of happening with no real rhyme or reason. It wasn't, you know, A led to B, then led to C. It was more, we showed up at C and there's no A or B. We're just kind of confused as to what's happening. So for instance, very early in the new story, you head back to Rift Town and it's completely destroyed and in shambles, and you're very curious why that occurred. Then you follow that up with a few more missions where things just seem to happen. It felt sort of like an action movie where there's not a lot of why built into the plot up until the last 3 missions. Then after you complete those, everything really kind of came together. It made much more sense. You had a big aha moment, and suddenly the story looks much better than it did up until that point. Because I'm not gonna lie, up until that point, I was pretty disappointed in it. So I would say, if you're a big story person, you want to see what happens on Enoch and the Outriders and all of that, power through the full story, which is about 10 hours, and it'll make a lot more sense at the end. Now, one other thing that I want to talk about is there is a big chunk of the story locked after you clear Tarja Gratar. So once you get to the very end of the campaign, that's going to kind of kick off the new end game mode naturally, just like we saw in the first kind of original game. But once you complete Tarja Gratar, there is additional story. So make sure to complete that. I'm not going to give away any spoilers or anything. Now, let's talk about Commander Arishrakal. So she was a very fun villain. I really enjoyed her. I wish I got to see more of her. She was very downplayed, which was unfortunate. You got to see her a couple times, interact with her a couple times, but that was about it. So I wish they had incorporated her a lot more into the story, because I think, again, she was a really kind of fun character to see, to kind of challenge our character in terms of plot development. So I wanted to see more of her. So back in the original Outriders, there was a lot of complaints about the amount of cutscenes that were in the game. You climb up a ladder, you crawl through a crevice, you're jumping down off a cliff, cutscene. Those are still in the game as well. So you're going to have a ton of those when you move between areas. If these bothered you, they're still there, so please don't think that those completely got removed or even reduced. Those are 100% still there. So overall, in terms of story, guys, it was sort of a crock-pot meal. Early on, you know, there wasn't a lot happening and it really kind of felt disappointing. It felt kind of cold. But then as things kind of came together and you started to actually see some plot development, some story development, then things started to make much more sense, and it ended up with the story being actually pretty decent. So I'm really excited to see where they take the game from here. But for now, if you're a story buff, that's what you're looking at. So let's move into the actual stuff we can interact with, right? Let's move to the gameplay. So Outriders Worldslayer is basically a lot more Outriders. If you didn't like the gameplay before, you're not going to see a huge difference now. If you did enjoy the gameplay of Outriders in the past, then you're going to have a lot more to love here. So I played through the entire game on my Blighted Rounds Technomancer because 1, it's my favorite build, 2, it was my most geared character, and it still just vaporizes everything in its path. So if you're really big into Blighted Rounds, you're gonna love it. But more builds are viable now because, again, if you go back into the past and you look at original launch Outriders, there was a lot of builds that just didn't work as well. Blighted Rounds basically was head and shoulders and just leaps and bounds above every other build because it was so powerful and so accessible. Now you have things like your armor stacking Devastator, you have Trickster builds, Pyromancer builds, a lot more build viability, which is extremely nice because people are going to want to play multiple characters. They're going to want that variety. So I played through on my Devastator and my Trickster, didn't have any issues conquering the content. There was at one point I did need to reduce my Apocalypse tier, which is like your world tier, down a couple because I just did not have the gear to power through some of those bosses. So if you're someone who's really into build variety and wants to go through on a character, or you want to go through on a build that isn't like meta, right? It's just some like random thrown together super fun build that you like, then you can do that. You don't have to worry about not being able to conquer a lot of the stuff out there. So that's the gameplay, but I want to talk about the big new thing that got added, and that's the Trials of Tarja Gratar. So this is the new endgame mode. Right now we have expeditions. You run those and you complete them. You get loot, you get drop pod resources that you can then spend at Tiago, which, by the way, Tiago's inventory now rotates. So he does have a rotating regular inventory, and then his legendary inventory, you can spend drop pod resources to re-roll. So it's not on a timer. You do have to spend currency to do it, but it's still much better than just having the static ones that you have there. And the new legendary items can roll with Tiago as well, so you can get lucky and get some of those new items in there. Okay, so back to the trials. So we have expeditions, drop pods, and loot. The trials is a little bit different. So it's more of a rogue light mode. You have a certain number of lives, and you have to complete the whole thing all the way to the very end. And this is where some of the kind of choice and risk rewards comes into play. Because you have a limited number of lives, you have 3, you have to kind of decide, do you want to risk trying to go into a trove, which is basically a big arena. If you complete the arena, then you get access to a chest that's going to give you tons of loot. And this is where you can start target farming. Certain troves drop certain things. You have a trove that drops helmets. You have a trove that drops gloves. So if you need gloves or helmets, then you can go hit those troves. They're going to give you that loot for that particular gear slot, whether it's legendary loot, apocalyptic loot, whatever. And it makes life a little bit easier. If you didn't get what you want, you can exit and you can jump back in and re-roll that trove. So they're tough, but they do give great loot. But then on the other hand, you also have things like arenas, which are essentially passageways that'll progress you through Tarja Gratar. So you have things like the Temple of the Anomaly, you have the Catacombs, and these are areas where you go through, you complete all of these different challenges, you kill the enemies, you kill mini bosses, and then at the end you are placed at the crossroads. Now the crossroads are your checkpoints. You start out at one, you clear a couple passageways or troves or whatever, you get to the next crossroads, and that's your next checkpoint. So if you die, you'll start there. And each checkpoint is blocked by a boss. Now, the bosses themselves are pretty copy and paste, other than one. So most of the knights that you have to face have the exact same moveset, but they just have varying degrees of difficulty. So sometimes their abilities will cover more of the area, so you have to be a little more precise with your positioning. Other ones will have, they'll cast more of the same spell versus a different one. So once you beat one, really, you know all of the moves the next one's going to use. And it really, I was kind of disappointed in this. I was really hoping that the bosses were going to be pretty different. Like I said, you're going to fight 3 knights that all have the same moveset. And then you're going to fight one that's not a knight. It's like a big kind of shaman looking guy. And he's the only one that's different. You have to go stand in these areas to drop his shield, and then you can DPS him. I'll have some more videos on that type of stuff later. But for now, it's just, I was very disappointed in this. I was really hoping that we were going to see something a little bit different and something that had just a little bit more variety. The nice thing is these bosses do drop guaranteed legendary drops, which is great. But going into these, I mean, like I said, once you beat the first boss, you're going to know what the other ones do. So being able to farm those legendaries is going to be pretty easy. Now, in terms of difficulty, Tarya Gratar is tough at first, especially if you're just getting dropped off at the end of the story. You may need to lower your Apocalypse tier to something a little more manageable until you get better gear, but honestly, I went in with my Blighted Rounds Technomancer. I was on Apocalypse tier 17. I was able to drop that down to 15 so I could clear it, and things were smooth sailing. Like, it was super just buttery smooth. It didn't have really hardly any issues. So you might have to do that, but either way, it worked out really well. Now, in terms of the map layout, this is something that I was confused on, and I'll admit that in my last video. The way that it was explained was, it seemed like there was a lot of randomized layouts, right? You would go into it and it'd be different each and every time. So that's not the case. The map layout does not change. When you go in, you're gonna have a crossroads, a couple passages, a crossroads, a couple passages, you know, that type of thing. So you're gonna see the same layout. However, there are things that are randomized. So enemy factions are going to be RNG. So depending on if you go into a trove, you might see like the wildlife, like the Porphyro, you might see insurgents, you might see the packs. So it really kind of depends on, you know, what role's there. But then there are also secret side areas that'll randomly appear each run. So for instance, I went through, I did a trove, I came back, and suddenly I had a secret entrance to a new place called the Catacombs, which was a hidden trove that I didn't have before with a hidden boss. I went in, I got smoked because I was running on a super high Apocalypse tier. I died, and then once I died, that entrance was closed and I couldn't go back in there. So I'm gonna keep looking out for that next time I run, but these are the type of things that I like. I really hope that they lean more into this. I really like the RNG aspect, and they have so much potential with Tarya Gratar to add these type of things in. You know, a new secret side area, a new layer, you know, swapping bosses. Like, it would be really cool if weekly the bosses would change. Maybe they have a couple different move sets. Maybe they're just different bosses altogether. I don't know. But things like that would add a lot more variety and break up the monotony a little bit of running this over and over and over again. Now, in terms of drop pod farming, expeditions are still the best place to do that. So Tarya Gratar is better at target loot farming, guaranteed legendary drops, all of those things. So if you need those, go Tarya Gratar. If you need drop pods to buy stuff from Tiago or reroll Tiago's inventory, expeditions are still the best place to do those. I mean, I cleared Tarya Gratar. I think I got 20,000 drop pods, whereas I ran one Apocalypse 15 or 16 expedition and got 42,000, and it was much faster. It's like 5 minutes. So depending on what you want, you're gonna have to go to a certain area. So overall, like I said, I like Tarya Gratar. I feel like it's a solid addition to the game. I do wish there was a bit more randomness to it, as well as a bigger variety in bosses. I really liked the Shaman boss because, again, it was something new. The enemies are tough. It's fun to play through. The kind of last sort of area is nice as well. I'm curious to see what everybody else thinks on it, but for now, it's a good addition. So let's talk about some of the new progression systems before we get to the new loot and we kind of wrap this whole thing up. So in terms of progression systems, there are two new ones that got added to the game. You have Pax points, which are Pax skill trees, and you have Ascension. So let's talk about Ascension because this one is the most simplistic to cover. So Ascension is basically the Diablo Paragon system, just with a little bit more flexibility. So at level cap, your experience bar turns into an Ascension bar. Each time you level up, it gives you a point, and then you can spend that point to increase certain stats. For instance, on my Blighted Rounds Techno, I'm increasing my weapon damage and my magazine size. For my Devastator, I'm increasing my armor. For my Trickster, I'm increasing my critical damage and my anomaly power. So you can go through and you can spin these however you would like to, and you can reset them at any point in time. So if you drop all of your points into firepower and you don't like how that plays out, you can reset and then spend all those points again. So this is one of those things that just provides a simple, valuable system to drop points into and rewards you for continuing to play the game. Things like this are necessary in today's market. You know, no game is going to survive and thrive when you get to max level and there isn't some sort of infinite progression system, which, by the way, this isn't infinite. I believe it goes up to 220 points or something like that. So it takes forever. Like I said, 25 hours in, I'm at Ascension 12 or 13. So it does take a little bit to level up, but it is worthwhile. Now let's flip over to Pax points, because Pax trees, Pax points, these are much, much, much more impactful. So it's a secondary skill tree that gives you only 5 points. But these 5 points have pretty incredible nodes that they can unlock. So for instance, my Technomancer, their turrets now refill all my ammo, they heal me, they provide me with additional benefits, and it makes my build even stronger. And each class has different ones, right, that all kind of play into their class identity. The opposite one of my Technomancer is the Desolator, which is all about adding damage over time and sniper damage. So it really kind of helps define your playstyle and gives you a different way to approach your character. Like I said, every class is different. Find what you really like and spend those points. Now, again, just like Ascension and just like the regular skill trees, you can reset these at any point in time. I've swapped mine 4 or 5 times depending on what gear I've gotten, and it's just that flexibility. I love it. So as you go through the game, you're going to get PAX points. You'll get 3 throughout the story, and then once you finish Target Gratar, you'll get the additional 2. So you have to play kind of the full experience to get all of these points. It's not difficult to get them. You don't have to beat the last boss or anything like that of Target Gratar to get the last one. You just have to play through it, and I believe one's on the first boss and then one's on the second boss or something like that. But either way, make sure to spend these PAX points because they're crazy. Now, both of these things gave Outriders some very much needed progression after reaching maximum level. We talked about this, and I believe this is going to help keep players engaged for a little bit longer rather than just saying, hey, go farm the loot that you want to farm. And speaking of loot, let's talk about all of the new stuff that came with the game. So up until this point, Outriders has been kind of showing off some of the new stuff on Twitter. They had a legendary weapons week, they had a legendary armor week, and all of these showed off some pretty cool sets. So I was able to actually fully complete a brand new set of Flame Leper for my Technomancer. Now, what this does is it morphs my toxic status into Blightfire and greatly increases the damage it deals. So it goes from like ticking at 7k damage to ticking at 20k damage. So it's almost a 3 times increase, which is just insane. Unfortunately, it was pretty lackluster compared to my Borealis set. So my Borealis Monarch set is just unreal. I mean, it's still king when it comes to frost poison builds. Just being able to freeze everything to control the battlefield, apply toxin, and then use your blighted rounds to just shatter everything. When they shatter, they explode. Map clear is just wild with the Borealis set. And while the Flame Leper probably has a place, I'm going to go through and try to optimize it to see if I can take advantage of it. Maybe dump all my points into status power and just see what we can do there. It did not even make a dent in my existing set from the original game. So I still have a couple new pieces that I want to try to build around as well. But for now, I'm going to stick with what I had. So if you're looking for the Flame Leper set to replace your Blighted Rounds and your Borealis set, it's not going to happen. Now, as for weapons, I was able to get my hands on the Charred Lance, which gives me a death ray that basically burns enemies whenever you aim down the sights. This is perfect for a Pyromancer, you know, a class that really thrives off of all those burn dots. Now, I haven't been able to experiment with it too much because a lot of my time has been spent farming the new rarity of loot that was added to the game called Apocalyptic Gear. So Apocalyptic Gear is a special epic drop that rolls with a 3rd mod slot. Now, this can also drop on legendaries, right? So it's only rares and legendaries that can get this. But this mod slot, this 3rd one, can be anything. It can even be tier 3 mods from legendaries, which makes for the insane possibility that you can get 3 tier 3 mods on one weapon, which is just wild. And I've seen that. I had one drop, it had a tier 3 mod baseline, it had a tier 3 mod in the apocalyptic slot, and then I went to my crafting table and I threw another tier 3 mod replacing the existing tier 2 that was there. And it was wild. It didn't work out hardly at all. It was terrible. It was a terrible gun. It's a terrible roll, but I just wanted to see if you could do it, and you can. So being able to really kind of dump a lot of these resources into the Apocalyptic Gear is going to be really the way I think we're going to start defining builds, and we're going to start taking our builds to the next level. Legendaries are kind of those uniques that you can sort of build around if you need to, but for the most part, you want to just strip those tier 3 mods off those legendaries, throw them onto a apocalyptic roll that's very good, and then just go to town. I've been using the same AR that I got dropped early on in the campaign, and I've just leveled it up through the crafting table, and it's been phenomenal. It's just literally been fantastic to use. So that wraps this one up, guys. That is Outriders Worldslayer in a nutshell. All of the things that I liked, all the things that I didn't like, but let's go ahead and do a quick recap. So in terms of the story, it felt very disjointed at first, but eventually things sort of came together to create a more coherent story that I could actually get behind and believe in. But it wasn't until about 2 or 3 missions from the end that everything really started to fall into place. Up until that point, it was pretty disappointing and meh. But once I finished it up and I entered Tarja Grottar, everything made sense, and I was able to, like I said, really kind of believe in it. In terms of the new end game, we have Trials of Tarja Grottar, which is a kind of roguelite mode that basically has you go through a preset map layout, clearing things like treasure troves for extra gear, facing off against bosses, and clearing out passageways full of enemies. The bosses themselves are pretty copy and paste. Really, kind of, you've seen one, you've seen them all, outside of one additional boss. That other additional boss has a very unique mechanic that really gives it its own identity. But besides that, you're going to be fighting knights with battle axes that do all of sort of the same stuff, just varying degrees of difficulty. Now, speaking of difficulty, Tarja Grottar is a little difficult at first, but eventually you're going to get enough gear to really kind of take control of this new area, and then you'll be able to slowly push through Apocalypse tiers. Now, in terms of progression systems, we do have the PAX trees and the Ascension system. The Ascension system is essentially Diablo Paragon. Every time you level up, you'll get a point. You can spend that point to boost certain stats, to boost your build, and really it just helps provide some extra oomph for whatever you're building. Then we have PAX trees. Your PAX skill trees are new, super powerful, very small and compact skill trees that will bring some different gameplay to whatever build you're going after. For instance, on my Blighted Technomancer, I was able to lean more heavily into turrets, which helped me augment my build to be even more powerful. In terms of new loot, we do have brand new gear sets to chase after. We have new legendary weapons to chase after, but the kind of crown jewel here is the new apocalyptic gear. This is a special gear drop that can happen for epics and legendaries that adds a 3rd mod slot that can roll with anything, a tier 1, tier 2, or even a tier 3 mod from legendaries. So overall, Outriders Worldslayer has been a solid addition to the Outriders franchise, and while I have had a bunch of fun, and I do think that this is a good addition, it's going to be something that I think people will play for maybe a couple weeks to a month, I do think $40 is a little bit rough to ask for the amount of content that we're getting, and some of the stuff that I think will not live up as long as we think it will. For instance, Tarja Grottar not being completely randomized and having the same handcrafted layout each and every time. Granted, there is a little bit of variance there. It's just not going to be something that players are looking for. When it comes to the brand new loot, some of the gear sets that I've experienced were a little lackluster, and ultimately I just kept using my original Outriders loot, at least for the time being. So, like I said, $40 is a little high to ask. I would wait for a sale. For me personally, I would pay $30 for this, not $40. But I do think if you like Outriders, if you enjoyed what Outriders brought to the table in the original one, you're going to love what you see here. It's a lot more of the same, just bigger, better, and with more stuff strapped on. I really hope this review has helped give a rounded experience of what to expect going in here. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you like action RPGs, loot, looter shooters, really anything that has epic and legendary drops, consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that bell to be notified of any videos that come out. And if you want to support the channel beyond a normal subscription, click that join button below to see some of the perks that you'll get access to. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you next time.